They called him the Untouchable. And for 17 years, no one could prove them wrong. Nicolino Loche stepped into the ring 136 times and made it look like he was fighting in a different dimension. Punches that should have landed sailed past his head by millimeters. Opponents who demolished everyone else suddenly couldn't hit water if they fell out of a boat. This wasn't luck. This was an accident. This was a man who had cracked the code of human movement and turned boxing into a science that only he understood. Watch any footage of Loche and you'll see something that shouldn't be possible. A fighter who moves like he knows exactly where every punch is going before his opponent even thinks about throwing it. He won 117 fights, not by knocking people out, but by making them question whether they actually knew how to box. Loche didn't just defend, he predicted. And tonight, we're breaking down exactly how he did it. Because what Nicolino Loche achieved in that ring was nothing short of supernatural. Born in Mendoza, Argentina, Nicolino Loche earned his nickname the hard way, by making it impossible for anyone to touch him. Intocable wasn't just a marketing gimmick or fighter hype, it was a mathematical reality. For nearly 2 decades, Loche turned boxing rings across South America into his personal laboratory, conducting experiments in human movement that left opponents, trainers, and spectators questioning what they just witnessed. He fought in an era when boxing was raw, brutal, and unforgiving, when fighters settled disputes with their fists and reputations were built on who could hit hardest and take the most punishment. Loche rewrote those rules entirely. He proved that in a sport obsessed with power and aggression, the ultimate weapon was complete mastery of space and time. While other fighters trained to destroy, Loche trained to disappear. While they studied how to hurt, he studied how not to be hurt. By the time the boxing world realized what they were witnessing, Loche had already perfected something that seemed to defy the laws of combat itself. But here's where the story gets bizarre. Everything about Nicolino Loche screamed that he should have been knocked out in his first professional fight. Take one look at him, and you'd bet against him lasting 3 rounds with anyone. Short, stocky, with arms that seemed too brief for his barreled chest, and a hairline that had surrendered to time before he even hit his prime. He looked like a nightclub bouncer who lost a bet and wandered into the wrong building. His punching power was practically non-existent, a career knockout ratio that barely crept above 10%. When Loche threw a right hand, it carried about as much threat as a strongly worded letter. His jab was accurate but soft. His left hook was reliable but lacked venom. He was the kind of puncher who couldn't crack an egg with a head start and a running leap. His training habits would make modern strength and conditioning coaches weep. Loche despised the gym with a passion that bordered on religious conviction. While world-class fighters were putting in 12-hour training days, perfecting their craft through repetition and sacrifice, Loche was somewhere else entirely. His idea of cardio wasn't road work or heavy bag sessions. His cardiovascular training came from chain-smoking cigarettes, sometimes 50 a day during his prime. Between rounds, his corner would hand him a towel in one hand and a cigarette in the other. This wasn't just unprofessional. In the context of elite boxing, it was practically suicidal. Yet somehow, this man, with the physical attributes of a retired bartender. So, how did he do it? How did a man who looked like he should be selling insurance instead of fighting for championships become impossible to hit? The answer lies in understanding that Loche didn't just have good reflexes. He had completely re-engineered the fundamental mechanics of defensive boxing. Every movement was calculated with surgical precision. Loche's defensive system was built on 4 core principles that worked together like a perfectly tuned machine. First was his mastery of distance manipulation. While most fighters think of distance as something you maintain or close, Loche thought of it as something you could control and weaponize. He didn't just move away from punches, he moved into them, closing off entire lines of attack before they could even develop. When an opponent threw a jab, Loche would step forward and press his shoulder directly against theirs, eliminating their ability to follow up with power shots. It was counterintuitive, dangerous, and absolutely brilliant. His second principle was positional dominance through smothering. Loche would duck low and drive his shoulder into his opponent's hip, completely disrupting their balance and offensive rhythm. From this position, most fighters had no choice but to reset their stance, giving Loche all the time he needed to either escape or counter. He preferred to position his left shoulder against his opponent's left hip, creating an angle where their most powerful weapons became useless. They could throw desperate hooks or uppercuts, but without proper distance to generate power, these shots were more annoyance than threat. The third pillar of his defense was his adaptation of the Philadelphia shell. Loche's shoulder roll wasn't just textbook perfect, it was customized for every type of punch he faced. Against crosses, he would lean back at the exact angle needed to let the punch slide harmlessly off his shoulder. Against hooks, he would adjust his positioning to create a slope that deflected the impact entirely. Against uppercuts, he would time his roll to redirect the force away from his chin. Most fighters learn one version of the shoulder roll. Loche had mastered dozens. But the fourth and most crucial element was his supernatural timing. Loche didn't just react to punches, he anticipated them. He would study his opponent's rhythm, their tells, their preferred combinations, and then position himself to be exactly where he needed to be when the punches arrived. He would pause deliberately between defensive movements, creating clear lines of sight to his opponent's body, reading their muscle tension and weight distribution like a book. These pauses served a dual purpose. They allowed him to gather information while simultaneously baiting his opponent into throwing the exact punch he wanted them to throw. Loche turned every exchange into a chess match, where he was always 3 moves ahead. Tokyo, December 1968. This is where theory becomes legend. Takeshi Fuji stood across the ring as the most devastating puncher in junior welterweight history. His resume read like a medical report: broken jaws, shattered ribs, careers ended with single shot. Fuji was a savage physical specimen. He threw every punch like he was trying to separate his opponent's head from their shoulders. Loche had racked up 89 wins to earn this shot, but nobody gave him a chance. This was Fuji's home territory, in front of a crowd that had come to watch their champion demolish another challenger. What they witnessed instead was a complete deconstruction of everything they thought they knew about boxing. Fuji came to fight a war. Loche turned it into a demonstration. From the opening bell, Fuji unleashed hell. Every punch carried maximum violence. Every combination was designed to end the fight immediately. He threw wild explosive shots with complete commitment, the kind of power that had flattened everyone else he'd faced. But Loche wasn't everyone else. As Fuji's punches came screaming toward him, Loche simply wasn't there when they arrived. Not by inches, but by millimeters. Fuji's right hands would graze past Loche's cheek so closely you could see the wind displacement, but they never connected. His hooks would whistle past Loche's temple, missing by the width of a cigarette paper. What made this performance transcendent wasn't just the defensive mastery, it was how Loche used Fuji's own aggression against him. Every wild swing that missed sent Fuji slightly off balance. Every committed punch that hit air drained his energy reserves. Fuji was essentially beating himself, burning through his stamina, while Loche conserved every ounce of his own. The champion threw 440 punches that night with murderous intent. He landed clean on fewer than 10. By the middle rounds, Fuji wasn't just missing. He was falling over from his own momentum, stumbling forward into empty space where Loche had been a split second before. The crowd fell silent. They had come to see their champion destroy another victim, but instead, they were watching something that seemed to violate the laws of physics. Loche wasn't just avoiding punches. He was making one of the most feared fighters in the world look like an amateur shadowboxing in the dark. When the final bell rang, Fuji had exhausted himself trying to hit a ghost, while Loche looked like he just finished a light sparring session. The impossible had happened. The Untouchable had proven that sometimes the most devastating performance in boxing isn't about what you can do to your opponent. It's about what you can make them do to themselves. But the Fuji fight revealed something profound about adaptation and survival in combat sports. Loche's defensive genius wasn't born from natural talent alone. It was forged by necessity. His complete lack of knockout power forced him to develop something far more sophisticated than raw athleticism. He couldn't end fights quickly, so he had to survive them perfectly. He couldn't overwhelm opponents with aggression, so he had to outthink them at every turn. His weaknesses became the foundation of his greatest strength. This creates a fascinating paradox in boxing philosophy. Fuji represented everything the sport traditionally celebrates. The deeper lesson of Loche's career is that mastery isn't always about being the strongest, fastest, or most naturally gifted. Sometimes mastery is about understanding your limitations so completely that you can transform them into advantages. Loche couldn't knock anyone out, so he became impossible to knock out. He couldn't overpower opponents, so he made them overpower themselves. He couldn't win through intimidation, so he won through complete technical superiority. In a sport that worships power, Loche proved that perfect technique could neutralize any amount of raw strength. Nicolino Loche finished his career with 117 wins out of 136 fights, a record that speaks to something far more impressive than knockout power or athletic dominance. For 18 years, he proved that boxing's ultimate achievement isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how impossible you can make it for anyone to hit you. He transformed every ring into a laboratory where world-class fighters became unwilling test subjects in his experiments with human movement and timing. The tragic irony of Loche's story is that the man who spent decades making himself untouchable in the ring couldn't dodge the one opponent that eventually catches everyone. He died of heart failure at 58, his body finally succumbing to years of chain smoking and the natural wear of time. But his legacy in boxing is permanent.